Imagine a place where troubled souls sought salvation, where broken lives were rebuilt, and where hope flourished in the face of despair. A sanctuary for the lost, a movement unlike any other. But what if that sanctuary held dark secrets? What if the man who promised salvation became the source of suffering? Synanon began as a refuge for addicts, a groundbreaking treatment center that defied convention. But what started as a path to recovery soon spiraled into a world of manipulation, control, and violence. A charismatic leader, a devoted following, and a system designed to break people down before rebuilding them in his image. And in the end, a single act of revenge would expose the terrifying truth. This is the story of Synanon, the cult that started with good intentions but ended in darkness. Welcome to Part 1. The year was 1958. In the streets of Santa Monica, California, heroin addiction was running rampant. Those suffering from drug abuse had nowhere to go, rehab programs were nearly non-existent, and even Alcoholics Anonymous turned them away. Then came Charles Dederick. Dederick wasn't a doctor. He wasn't a psychologist. He was just a man who had struggled with alcoholism himself. After finding sobriety through Alcoholics Anonymous, he had a revelation: what if drug addicts had a place of their own? A place where they could support each other, free from judgment. He gathered a small group of addicts and started hosting meetings. They called themselves Tender Loving Care. But as the group grew, Dederick saw an opportunity. This wasn't just a support group anymore, this could be something bigger. Something revolutionary. And so, Synanon was born. Synanon wasn't like other rehab centers. There were no doctors, no traditional therapy. Instead, there was the game. The game was raw, brutal, and confrontational. Members sat in a circle, taking turns attacking each other's weaknesses. They screamed, insulted, and exposed each other's deepest fears. The idea? Break them down to rebuild them. And it worked. People who had been written off as hopeless got clean. They found a new family in Synanon. Word spread fast, and by the early 1960s, Synanon wasn't just a rehab program, it was a movement. Doctors, lawyers, even Hollywood actors were drawn to its radical approach. Synanon bought up buildings, turning them into sprawling communities. At its peak, it pulled in millions of dollars a year. But there was one problem. Dederick didn't believe in graduation. He decided that once you joined Synanon, you were in it for life. And just like that, Synanon wasn't a rehab anymore. It was something else. Something more dangerous. At first, the rules seemed simple. No drugs. No alcohol. No leaving. But soon, the rules changed. Dederick believed members needed total commitment. Newcomers were forced to go cold turkey, no medication, no medical supervision. If you survived, you stayed. If you didn't, that was your problem. For the first 90 days, you couldn't talk to your family. You couldn't have outside friends. The only people in your life were Synanon members. The more isolated they became, the more dependent they were on Synanon. Then came the forced labor. Members worked for free, running businesses that made millions. They thought they were working for the greater good. In reality, they were building an empire, one that only Dederick controlled. And then, the punishments began. At first, the game was just verbal abuse. But over time, it became something much worse. People were beaten in the name of discipline. Those who questioned Dederick's rules were publicly humiliated. And the worst part? They accepted it. Dederick convinced them that Synanon was the only thing keeping them alive. Without it, they would fall back into addiction. The outside world was the enemy. Members began turning on each other, reporting those who spoke out. Dederic's control was absolute. But in the 1970s, he took it even further. Women were forced to shave their heads. Married couples were ordered to divorce and remarry new partners, chosen by Dederic. Then came the vasectomies. Men were forced to undergo sterilization. Pregnant women ordered to have abortions. At this point, Synanon wasn't a rehab program anymore. It wasn't even a movement. It was a cult. And soon, people started fighting back. By the mid-1970s, people were escaping. Former members, now called splittees, began speaking out. They told horror stories of abuse, forced sterilization, and brainwashing. Authorities started investigating. But Dederic didn't back down. Instead, he declared Synanon a religion. With that, Synanon became untouchable. Police couldn't interfere. The government couldn't tax them. Dederic thought he had won. But then, he made a fatal mistake. In 1978, attorney Paul Morentz took on a case against Synanon, representing a former member who had been held against his will. Morentz won. And Dederic? He was furious. One night, two Synanon members crept up to Morentz's house. They opened his mailbox and dropped something inside. A rattlesnake. The moment Morentz opened the mailbox, the snake lunged. It sank its fangs into his hand. Venom surged through his veins. For days, he fought for his life. But he survived. And now, law enforcement had the evidence they needed. The snake attack sent shockwaves through the nation. Authorities launched a full-scale investigation. What they uncovered? Far worse than anyone imagined. Secret tapes. Death threats. Plans for murder. In Part 2, we'll reveal how the empire of Synanon collapsed, and the terrifying legacy it left behind. Stay tuned. If you found this story interesting, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss Part 2. And let me know in the comments, what do you think about Synanon? Was it ever truly about helping people, or was it always destined to become a cult? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in Part 2.